Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another webinar episode of our Nature versus Nurture series. And tonight we're going to be talking about going beyond genetics, really how to hack your health blueprint, your DNA. And I am delighted to be co-hosted tonight with Dr. Tracy Steady Hardcastle, our new clinical director of the DNA company. My name is Dr. Laura Varden. I am Dean of the DNA University and an in-house clinician here at the DNA company. So welcome. Good evening, Dr. Steady. How are you?
I am well. How are you, Dr. Varden?
I am doing quite well on this getting cool evening in the Northeast.
It is. Yes.
Yeah, temperatures are dropping and environment is changing, and it's affecting how our DNA works, how we live, how what we call epigenetics occurs, which we're going to be diving into in a little bit. Um, One thing I would like to ask, if you haven't already, please fill out the poll questions. We will be going over that very shortly. We really want to know what's going on with you, our audience. By the way, I would love to know where all of you are hailing from. Where are you on this planet? If you can pop that in the chat, we'd love to see. But we also want to know what is it that you are here tonight? What is it that you want to learn? What is it that you're going through? Oh, here we go. So I've got people: Ohio, Las Vegas, New Jersey, Florida, California, wonderful, Toronto, Canada, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Virginia. Everyone, thank you so much. Love to see you scattered across the planet. Someone from Australia. Beautiful. Thank you for joining us. I know it's bright and early in the morning for you right now. So I should say good morning to you. So anyway, one of the things that we're going to be talking about and actually working off from. So last month, we did a webinar that really challenged the myths of genes. And so working off of that, today, we're going to focus on what you can do with your genes, and not just your genes, but your blueprint. And that really leans in on our DNA 360. That is a functional way of looking at your DNA and offering you, hey, here's the cards you've been dealt. Here's your blueprint. Now, what do you do for it? And that's what we're going to talk about. And I have something for you. Did you know that around 66% of US adults now track at least one health metric? So we're talking whether it be weight, sleep, diet, any of the other metrics you can think of. By the way, if you track one of those things or any of those things, some sort of health metric, put a 1 in the chat, please. I'd love to see. I'd put a 1. I've got my Aura ring, so I'm tracking my sleep. So, Dr. Tracy, do you track health metrics?
I do. I would also be putting a 1 in the chat.
Oh, there we go. I like how somebody put 2. 3, you're tracking several health metrics. Yeah, so a lot of you are. And that is fantastic. Because it really comes down to, if you don't track it, how can you hack it? And the thing is that, for that 66%, which we seem to be getting a lot of them today, that most of those efforts aren't informed by one blueprint that really matters, and that is your genetics. So we're going to show you how to bring the blueprint into the loop of these biometric tracking. So let me ask you, Dr. Tracy, how should people be looking at their tracking? I know that we did a webinar on different trackers just
We did?
last week.
Yeah.
So how can you help someone to reframe or to look at using health trackers and, okay, so I've got this, but, give me an overview of how they can use their DNA 360 to do that.
Well, by seeing what their genes are, what they came in with, and then making lifestyle adjustments accordingly, they should be able to use their health tracker to see changes over time. So if you know what your baseline was with your health tracker, and then you apply the principles from the DNA 60 to your life, then your all of your measurements should in theory, if they were not optimal before, they should become more optimal as time goes on. And you may have started out with some that are great. Like you might be like, I get so much deep sleep, it's awesome. In which case, that's not something that you need to improve. But for someone else, that might be something that's really an issue for them. And so looking at genes can really be a map toward getting to the place that you want to get those smiley faces on your health tracker.
I love it. Yeah, actually, we love getting the dopamine hits going, "Yeah, I did it. I got it. I'm doing well." And, because these actually give us those, objective data, markers going, "Hey, this is how you're doing." Something beyond just the subjective, like, "Oh, hey, I've got some energy today. I've got, my brain is functioning sharp. I'm really doing well." Those are very important to do.
Well, and it can kind
Before
of work
Okay.
backwards too, right? So if you wake
Yes.
up and you've got your health tracker on and you feel a little off and you notice, "Oh, I didn't get enough REM sleep last night." Then you can start to make these kinds of associations, and then if you can start to note, "What did I do differently? Did I
Mhm.
eat too late? Did I not get any exercise? Did I not get enough sunlight?" All of the things, and then um adjust based on both how you feel and how that correlates with your
Right.
health data.
Yeah, that really puts in forefront triggers, things that, that cause and effect, not just good, but that negative, that you so beautifully explained. So I would ask if you could do the honors, if Vanny could bring up the poll, if you would please go through them.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
All right. So, question number 1, if you could hack one area of your health, which one would you choose? And almost half of you said sleep. And after that was diet, then stress, and then at 10 and 9% exercise and environment. So it seems like the sleep is a big one. So we'll make sure that we talk about that today. How familiar are you with epigenetics? And 40% of you understand the basics, 29% have heard of it, 21% of you are already applying it, and 10% not at all. So we will make sure that we go over some of that for those of you in that 10% who this is a new concept for you. What do you think has the greatest impact on biological aging? And um, 50% of you said both lifestyle and genes equally. 45% said lifestyle, 4% said genes, and 1% said not sure. And number 4 is which system feels hardest for you to control? And 31% of you said gut health, 24% stress response, then around 20% circadian rhythm and hormones, and 4% were other. And so we asked you to add those to the chat. And number 5, which outcome would be most meaningful for you? And 40% of you said long term disease prevention, followed by slower aging, better sleep, more energy, and then 10% stress resilience. So thank you so much for answering those for us. It really helps us to hone our information because we have so much of it to offer you that we want to make sure that we're giving you something that feels applicable to you.
Yeah, and I think that, that last question, about what would be most meaningful to you, that long-term disease prevention being overwhelmingly, number one, we can actually flip it into a positive sense. and saying increasing health span. Because if you are optimizing your health, if as you get older, okay, in the long term, instead of disease, you want health, well, wouldn't better health prevent you from having disease? So, and there's a whole aspect of the way that we phrase things, and the positive, negative, and focusing on the positive, and that mental aspect to it, I think is really intriguing in and of itself, and could probably actually be its own webinar. But uh, you know, they really are the same thing. But I just want to try to give it a little bit of a positive spin, because it really puts you, the person, in control. And that's what it comes to. It's a matter of controlling your own destiny by, one, knowing your genes. Okay. So you have your genes. This is what you're born with. You're not going to change it, but you can affect how your genes are expressed. And this really is the foundation of what epigenetics means. Your genes provides that starting point. But the choices you make, the things, even if you don't necessarily make a choice, but you're in an environment, because you don't choose where you're born, where you're born, what you're given, what your mom ate, what toxins she was exposed to. You don't really have a choice in that, but it's affecting your genes, the way they're expressing, and the way that you are growing in the womb. And then once you're out of the womb, how you continue to grow with the food that you're being given, the food that you choose to eat as you grow, the things that you choose to do. All of these choices, lifestyle, diet, whether you exercise or not, whether you smoke or not, whether you drink alcohol or not, all of those choices are all affecting the way that your genes are being expressed. And that right there is really the basis of epigenetics in turning on and off your genes of your DNA. So now we are showing you, these are some genes. Obviously, we're not going to be going through all of them, but here are some important genes, ones that are available in your DNA 360 report, in your gene data, that we offer to you, that will give you information on things like sleep, that most of you are very interested in tweaking and making better. And then, hey, here's some hacks, here's some things that you can do. And then using a type of tracker, a biometric tracker, to say, okay, so here are my genes. Here's a change in behavior, food, whatever the case is, those choices. How am I doing? Am I making it better? Am I making it worse? And I do want to reiterate, your genes do not dictate fixed outcomes. They are not diagnostic. Okay. All they are a blueprint that are influenced by the choices you make. Okay. So this is really the genesis of the nature versus nurture. And there's a lot of studies out there that have looked at twins, exact same genetics. Okay, that's what identical twins are. But how they bifurcated in what has happened to them physically, disease wise, health wise, based on the exposures, the choices, the lifestyle, diet, things that they have experienced in their life. So, and I will also mention that another way, besides trackers, these biomarker trackers that you can wear, is actually doing certain types of tests. For example, our DNAging test. Our DNAging premium test looks at your biological age versus your chronological age. So chronological age is how many, times around the sun, how many years old are you? Okay. That's your chronological age. You're not going to be changing that. Okay. That is what it is. But your biological age is how your cells, how your tissues age. Because I'm sure everyone, and Dr. Tracy, please, tell me if you've noticed this. You see, say, we'll number it down to two people, exact same age. Okay. Say they're 50 years old each. Okay. One looks like they're probably in their mid to late 30s. Another one looks like they're probably in their 70s. Okay. That's what we call biological aging. How are you aging in your cells and tissues? Have you seen that before when you've looked at someone and you kind of guess their age in your brain and then they tell you and you're either like, wow, what you're doing is working, or going, wow, okay. Yeah, this
Yes,
has been rough.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I haven't been to a high school reunion recently, but that's a perfect place to do a little bit of this looking around, because when you were 18, you probably all looked more or less like you were the same age. And if you go to one of those events, you may notice, oh, that person, looks so much younger than this person. What do I look like? Because I think we all have this perception of what we look like, and sometimes our peers' appearance can be shocking. But I was actually someplace, and there was a tour guide who uh, I thought was significantly older than me. And it turned out he's like 2 years older than I am. And it was obvious that he needed to do some work in order to have his cells be happier. But you can even tell this sometimes when people come back from vacation.
Mm,
People might walk up to you and say, "You look so great. What have you been doing?" And it was the relaxation, or maybe if it's easier to eat out of your garden over the summer, you may look different by fall. People can actually notice things, these small things about the changes that we make in our lifestyle. And
right.
if you haven't seen someone for a while and then suddenly they look a lot better or a lot worse, that's their cellular aging shining through. So, and not that it's about appearance. We're not trying to tell you that it matters if you have wrinkles or anything like that. It's more that that can be reflective of what's going on the inside.
Yeah, but generally, I mean, we do look at appearance because that's the first thing that we see. But there's more to it, absolutely. And I'm very glad that you brought that up and gave that differentiation, because a lot of it is, how do you feel? If someone has more energy, if their joints, are not creaking and they're like, oh, and having a hard time just moving, getting up off the floor, if they can get up off the floor, that makes a difference too. How are you functioning? How is your body moving? And how do you want it to move? So, oh, and it brought me to a thought. If you've ever looked at the president when they enter office, now in the US, a president's term is only 4 years. But I'll tell you, if you go back and look at several of the US presidents, a picture of them when they entered office, and then 4 years later, they look like they've aged probably 10, 15 years. Seriously. And that is stress related. Stress is a killer. So,
And
and
probably sleep. I bet they don't get as much sleep as they did before they were president either.
probably not. Yeah, not a job that I would go for, but I'll leave that to politicians. So let me ask you, Dr. Tracy, what genes would you highlight when you are talking about, say, stress or toxins? What could people, what could our audience look at in their DNA 360 reports? And then not just talking about which genes, but what could they do to affect them to change the epigenetics, the expression of those genes?
So if I think about SOD2, and this would be in the detoxification report. And if you don't have your reports up on your computer, feel free to download the app because that's a really quick and easy way to look at all of them and to flip back and forth through reports, as Dr. Varden and I are talking about your genes this evening. And SOD2 really has to do with mitochondrial health and oxidative stress. And some people's have more or less it's about the enzyme, and so some are more optimal than others, and so some will need more antioxidant support than others. But then you also, when you're looking at that one, you want to also look at GPX, because what SOD2 does is it will take oxidants and it will turn them into hydrogen peroxide. And then the GPX gene converts the hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen. And so you want those to be working at more or less the same pace, because if they don't, then you can end up with too much hydrogen peroxide in your system, and that's not really what we're looking for either. You don't want that hanging out in your mitochondria and in your cells. So that would be one place that I would look. Some people just need more mitochondrial support, and more antioxidants than others. And so there are supplements that are good for that. There are foods that are good for that. And so knowing what those things are, based on your genetics, empowers you to make choices in that direction. And then you know that if you go through something stressful, either physically or emotionally, that can create more oxidants. So then you can think to yourself, a lot of times, we don't make good decisions under stressful circumstances. Um,
Mm. Yeah.
and in terms of what we're putting into our bodies and remembering to take our supplements, it's sort of like all of that stuff just goes out the window. And that's actually the time when we need it most, especially if your genes are reflecting that. So that's where I would start. That was sort of a long answer for you, Dr. Varden, but
Oh, no, I think it's wonderful because I mean, really, when we're talking about a lot of the chronic conditions, a lot of the issues that people have, if you work it back, and that's what functional medicine is all about, is going to the root cause. It is something that is causing inflammation in the body. But if you go back even further, the inflammation, that trigger of inflammation comes down to the health of the mitochondria, because the mitochondria are not just making ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that energy molecule of the cell. Because honestly, it well, that's really important, because if you don't have energy to do stuff, you're not going to be doing anything. If Put it this way, if you stopped making ATP, you'd be dead in 3 seconds. That's how important that energy is. Okay. But even beyond that, mitochondria are these environmental sensors. They will trigger inflammatory responses. They will trigger these cytokines and other, things that will happen within the cell. They will determine whether they need to make more of themselves, called mitogenesis, or decide, oh, you know what? I'm just not working very well anymore, and I'm just going to commit hara-kiri. And, that's called mitophagy, where, it breaks down, gets recycled. So it's very, very important. And that's really the basis when you get down to that subcellular structure that really impacts the whole system of our body so profoundly. And it's really interesting that there was this 2025 study. Actually, it just came out in February of this year. Okay. And this particular study followed around 800 adults. And it showed that omega 3s, okay, so the good fats, even though I hate saying like good and bad, but it's usually the type of fatty acids that we don't get enough of. They're usually found in, things like salmon and other, fatty fishes. They're found in cod liver oil, and you can get it in supplementation form. So omega 3s. They also looked at vitamin D, okay, which is also a hormone. and structured exercise. So having those three main things, it actually slowed the biological aging, which we were talking about earlier. All right. Just over a period of 3 to 4 months, or I'm sorry, by 3 to 4 months over just 3 years. Apologies for that. So they ended up changing their their biological clocks by 3 to 4 months. Okay. Over 3 years. So they were getting younger biologically. That's the bottom line. Okay. And it's really important that you understand everyday choices literally rewrite your operating manual. Okay. It's that important. So is there another particular gene or pathway that you think is very impactful when it comes to being aware of that we can affect epigenetically that would have a, a systemic effect that people can pay attention to?
I think methylation is also really important. And, you know, we talk about methylation quite a bit, and it's been sort of a buzzword in the space for a while. Um, that's not just one gene
Mhm.
that works on that, though. There are several of them, and they work in concert. And so, one of the things that I really love about the DNA 360 is that it looks at the interactions between genes because that's so important. Not only are we not our genes, they are not our destiny. One gene, definitely. To go back to September's webinar, which I was not on, but I did see, is one gene is not telling you the whole story. It's really it's like reading one page out of a book and then thinking you know the whole plot. That's just not how genetics works, right? So MTHFR, which you know has also been in the news lately, is definitely an important gene, but then you also have to look at SHMT1 along with it in order to determine if you need supplementation and which, and if so, which type. It's always good to eat vegetables that contain folate. That's a really wonderful thing to do. But for some people, they may need supplementation in order to really help themselves to methylate. And so knowing those two genes together is really important, along with COMT. But I'm not going to complicate it because that's uh, it. I sometimes go down the full rabbit hole, and that's not what we're here to do. We're just here to give examples of things that you can find in your reports and how you can utilize them together.
So, can you give a couple of examples of why the methylation pathway is so important?
Because things need to be methylated. It's a chemical reaction in order to well, it does so many things in the body. It has so many different reactions. And actually the way that things are methylated, that's part of how the testing works, is looking at that within the body. But it helps with detox. It helps with so that's how things can get out of your body. There's a whole what I'm seeing in my mind is a whole picture of the whole methylation cycle. And so there are these different things that have to happen at different times to convert something that you don't want too much of in your body into something that is not harmful and or can pass out of your body. So this is it's chemistry. And we're all made up of these little chemical reactions inside of us that are really important to keep us functioning in the way that we need to be functioning.
Thank you. And by the way, if you are wondering, where do I find these genes for the methylation pathway? You'll find them in your anti-inflammatory profile report. So for the 7 systems, that's going to be your main system. And then if you click in on that, then you can actually go to the methylation subreport. And there are other subreports. One of them she's already spoken about with the SOD2, that's your antioxidation pathway that helps with the mitochondrial functioning. And actually, I did see a question about the SOD2 GPX as far as the alleles, like, you know, what do they represent? So if you have a CC, as in cat, okay, that for SOD2, actually, this goes for GPX as well. That means that it's fast. fast. That enzyme works very quickly. You clear oxidants very quickly out of the mitochondria, break them down quickly. If you have a TT, so as in Tom, that means that you have slow activity, and that goes for both SOD2 and GPX. And honestly, you want these two working at the same speed. You don't want one faster or slower than the other. It actually works a bit more efficiently. So if both of them are fast, great. If both of them are moderate speed, great. But if you have like a fast SOD2 and a slow GPX, that's where you can start getting into problems that I know Dr. Steady had mentioned a little bit earlier with the hydrogen peroxide buildup and aging of the cells. So I wanted to give that. If you do have any other questions regarding some of the things that we're talking about, please toss them in the Q&A because we will be going over those and digging in a little deeper for your questions. All right, so let's go to how we can break down some other genes, especially in the realm that people were very interested in, sleep, okay? Because the systems that you have, sleep being one of the system reports, okay, very important. Obviously, I mean, we talked about this, throughout several different webinars, how important sleep is. We actually have dedicated some webinars on sleep specifically. This is very foundational because this is the time that your body is doing that repair. That is the time that the experiences and the things that you learn about whatever it is during the day gets shifted over from short-term memory to long-term memory. It's when the cells do the house cleaning in the brain, clearing the junk out and resetting your body. It's resetting the adenosine molecules to get them back into ATP by putting phosphates back on them. All of these different things, a lot of things are happening. You make testosterone when you're sleeping. So it goes for sex hormones, all of these wonderful things that happen during sleep. And actually there was a phrase I had brought up in a meeting earlier this week that the difference between despair and hope is a good night's sleep. And that is so true. I don't know about you, Dr. Steady, but there were times I've just been like, just everything just, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore. It just felt awful and everything. And what did our grandmothers always say? Just sleep on it. Making a decision, having an upset, just having an argument, just sleep on it. They were so brilliant. I love our grandmothers. But it's
That
true.
also makes it twice as frustrating if you can't, right? So
I sleep.
if you have trouble sleeping, and especially if you have to make a decision or you're
Mhm.
in bed just thinking about the things instead of actually being able to sleep, not only are you not having, growth hormone and all of the things that you mentioned, helping
Mhm.
your body to recover, Dr. Varden, um, but you also emotionally don't get that rest and that letting go, and that
Right.
the dreams and stuff like that can help you process it. I've been having some doozies lately. So that's probably one of the reasons I think that this is such a huge issue for our audience is because they're not getting enough sleep.
Right. Absolutely. And we have, like I said, a dedicated report for sleep. And you'll see that a lot of the genes that are there are related or include ones from your mood and behavior report, because that can significantly impact your sleep. But I'm going to focus on one in particular that is dedicated to sleep, actually, too. um, the clock gene. And isn't that wonderful? Yes, the clock gene. And this is something that it dictates our circadian rhythm in every single cell, tissue, organ of the body. It has a circadian rhythm. Okay. And there's also another gene called the CRY1, CRY1. These two together really help to regulate that sleep wake cycle. And so again, the clock gene is that master circadian rhythm gene. The cry gene is a gene that helps set the body's internal clock. It really works in conjunction with the clock gene. So, for example, uh, the clock is like the starter or motor for your body's daily rhythm. Okay. It's telling certain genes to turn on and start the cycle for the day. So you can think of clock like a gas pedal for your body's inner timekeeper. Okay. Now, when cry comes along, you can think of that as more like the brake. After the initial burst of clock, okay, cry one is made and then goes back to tell clock, hey, slow down, stop for a little while. When cry one attaches to clock, it blocks from turning on target genes. Okay, because remember that's like a hitting um, that brake. All right, and so what it does is that turning on the clock, turning off the cry one, that creates that regular repeating rhythm, that daily rhythm that tells your body when to feel awake, when to feel sleepy. And yes, this even affects melatonin processing. Melatonin is a neurotransmitter that from serotonin, actually methylation works in there, that tells the body, okay, slow down, get tired, we want to get you to sleep. It's one of the main ones. So if cry one is too strong, okay, if it is dysregulated, where those breaks, it breaks too much, the cycle slows down, meaning that you feel tired later. It makes your whole sleep schedule, it can shift forward, making you more of a night owl. Okay. So again, clock pushes that start of your daily cycle to give you that wake up and go. It's one of those main ones, and there are others, but we're focusing on that. Cry one comes in later to then put on the brakes and to slow down, to stop. So that again, that back and forth between these two keeps your body clock ticking through a roughly 24-hour cycle. Now, if you have dysregulation with your clock gene, then that initial get up and go can be off shifted. So if you've got both things off shifted, that can really shift off your 24-hour, and you may be more one of those night owls as compared to, the morning bird, or all the different animals that have been attached to different sleep wake cycles. So you're like, okay, depending on what I am, me personally, I happen to be slightly dysregulated in my clock gene. Okay. I do a little bit better where more of my energy and focus and everything else is a little bit later in the day. I do get up early. I wake up without an alarm, like 6:30, between 6:30, 7 o'clock every morning, somewhere in between there. And, I start getting tired, around 10:30. So that's my natural rhythm, but I have the most energy a little bit later because of that. But say your sleep is disrupted, say you're having issues, okay? There are a lot of things that you can do to help adjust and support the genes that you have. There's 4 pillars of sleep: QQRT: quantity, quality, regularity, and timing. So when you look at each of those things, work toward the easiest thing to start, like having a consistent sleep time. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, even on weekends, even on holidays, plus or minus maybe, a half hour stuff, but to have that regularity, to have that timing. Another thing is to have light exposure. within like an hour of waking up, get out in the sunlight. Have that natural sun get into your eyes, onto your skin. That it actually like clicks on the clock gene to get that going. And BDNF plays in there. Brain derived neurotrophic factor also plays a factor in that. So you want to set your body up going, oh, it's daytime. I need to be up. I need to be energized. Let's go. And at night, you want to reduce your blue light exposure. This, the screens, the bright lights after the sun goes down, because that is telling your body, oh, wait, it's still bright out. I need to be awake. So again, these are not expensive things. These are not difficult things. It just takes that determination of just doing it. And those are just a few of the basic things that you can do. So hacks that you can do to help improve your sleep. Now, obviously, depending on if you have a lot of other issues, it, that's something that I actually would say work with a practitioner who can read your genes, who can look at your history, environment, a whole bunch of things that can affect sleep to help you get better sleep. But we're kind of doing a more broad overlook. So, oh, there was a question about where do we find the cry1 gene. This is one of the genes that we're going to be adding into the reports, the reported reports later this year, but we have it in your gene data Excel file that you can download right from the patient portal. So, when you go in, you'll see a little button that says gene data download. You'd click on that and it's right in there. So
I just want to say that sometimes people look at their reports and they think, well, I have optimal genes for sleep. Why am I not sleeping?
yeah.
And it doesn't mean that your genetic report is wrong. It just might mean that that would be a great time to work with a practitioner to see, because things like blood sugar regulation, when you're exercising, how much you're exercising, what's happening with your cortisol, things like inflammation, all of these things can have an effect on your sleep. And so if you're looking at your gene report and you're thinking everything should be great and it's not, um, there are other things that we can look at that can help you to solve the mystery of what's going on with your sleep.
So let's move on to another system that we look at. Let's talk about gut and metabolism. You know what? I'm gonna pedal back there for a minute, because you were just talking about stress, your cortisol levels. And I've already mentioned a gene related to that. And you mentioned another gene related to this, talking about the stress response. Would you mind speaking into a couple of genes when we talk about the stress response and how we can hack that?
So one of the ones that you had mentioned, Dr. Varden, was BDNF, and that has to do with the plasticity of your brain, meaning how quickly can and easily can it rewire and be flexible in its thinking and in its healing and things like that, and that it also plays a part in stress resilience. Um, there are definitely things that you can do to help raise BDNF levels within your body. Um, and some of them are exercise, depending on your genetics. How hard you want to exercise will be determined by that. Heat, making sure that you have enough vitamin D and omega 3s, which were things also mentioned in that study before. So you can kind of see where there's overlap in some of these things. And making sure that you have that as high as possible, that level of BDNF, will help. And then COMT is another one that I mentioned, and that breaks down a whole bunch of things. Among them, dopamine, and noradrenaline or norepinephrine. They're the same thing, just with different names. And that is regulated how quickly a shut off happens when you are exposed to stress is related to another gene, which is called ADRA2B. And that will be listed as I or D. So if you have a deletion in that gene as opposed to an insertion, which is the I, then it everything doesn't slow down. The stress response can keep going because more you have your receptors are going to be exposed to more noradrenaline, and the COMT that I mentioned before is what breaks that down. So depending on the interaction between those two things, your stress response may be greater or less than someone else's. And the good news is that there are things that can be done to help support these genes. COMT is involved in methylation, and there are things that stress COMT and make it more slow. So if we don't do those things, then that can also be really helpful. And the right amount of exercise actually does help people with ADRA2B deletions. I was actually doing a little bit of research about this earlier. And Moderate exercise and weight training and meditation and making sure that there's downtime, that you're not just going all the time, that there's actually time for relaxation, whatever that means to you, is really helpful for that kind of presentation that you might see in your gene report.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned something really important, the exercise. And it was in the study that I had brought up earlier on how exercise helped for longevity in decreasing your biological age. And when we're talking about exercise, obviously, in our hormones and fitness report, it does a breakdown, of the type of exercise that would work best for your genetics. Now, again, it's a plethora of genes that are working together that play off of each other. We take genes from your cardiovascular profile. We take genes from your hormone profile. These genes together, along with your detox, all make up, hey, this is how your fitness, your exercise, what would work best for you. I'm going to extract a single gene. Okay. And again, I know we talked about this, like one gene doesn't totally dictate, but for the sake of looking at a particular gene, what your genotype may be and how that can work into possibly a type of exercise, and a gene we don't talk about very often, and that would be the ACE gene. So this is the angiotensin converting enzyme gene. And this particular gene, it really works in with, well, we call it the SALT gene because it works and is incorporated an assessment for blood pressure. So actually, uh, a cute name to it is called the garden hose, like when you squeeze garden hose and you can make the water come out even faster and you apply more pressure. Well, that's the same kind of thing that the ACE gene does because it works with vasoconstriction. It's responsible for making an enzyme that's involved in regulating your blood pressure, which controls, okay, this is going to be a long word, it controls the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, or the RAS system, RAAS, which is a critical regulator of blood volume and of systemic vascular resistance. That's just a fancy way of saying the garden hose, that tightens up and that can control the amount of tension that the muscles of the vasculature have. So getting to how does this all work in with type of exercise? So for example, an endurance exercises or power training exercises, the response to those two different types of exercise. So because the ACE gene helps to control how your body responds to different exercises through the vasculature. Okay. There are two main versions, okay, for the gene. It's actually an insertion and deletion, but in the reports, there are certain alleles that are associated with that. So the for the insertion, it's represented by the A as in apple allele. The deletion is represented by the G as in George allele. So the A allele version, okay, that's linked with better endurance. So people with that allele tend to do well in activities that, like long distance running or cycling. Now, again, I do have to state here that that's not the only one. So just because you have an A allele and ACE doesn't mean, hey, I should be a marathon runner. Actually, no, that's one piece of the overall puzzle. You actually have to look at your cardiovascular profile, have to look at, the hormones and all of the other aspects that I was talking about earlier. But in studies, in research, okay, I'm just talking about the ACE gene right now. So for the G allele or that version, that's linked with greater power and strength. So people with that allele usually respond better to short explosive activities like sprinting or weightlifting. Um, and actually, I happen personally happen to have a GG version, and wouldn't you know, in track I was actually a sprinter. A lot of the sports that I did were more of that short burst, and figure skating and doing things, and that's what I preferred. And it's really interesting because I find that most of the time, people will prefer activities that their genetics support. Have you found that, Dr. Steady?
I think people do tend to be more naturally drawn to those things and find the other thing kind of either unappealing or difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really interesting. But again, that's one piece of the puzzle. He is a player on the team, but you have to look at the other players as well that we have on there. But very interesting because that's not one of the genes that we usually mention. So it's nice to bring forth and spotlight some of these genes that we don't look at so much. So let's grab another gene or two that that you think important in ways that that someone could hack it.
Well, I think that one of the things that I like to think about is CYP1A2 um, for a couple of different reasons. One of them is because of caffeine. So if you are a slow metabolizer of caffeine, you need to stop drinking it probably earlier than someone who has a fast metabolism of it. And you probably already know who you are. Some people say, I can't drink coffee past noon, whereas someone else might say, I can't drink it past 4. And the person who has to stop at noon thinks I would be up all night if that were the case. But sometimes people don't realize that that's the case and may not even think about the fact that they're having caffeine in the afternoon and relate it to sleep. Personally, I pretty much have to stop drinking it like after 10 a.m. So, and if I don't, then I do notice a difference, not even in my ability to fall asleep, but in the quality of my sleep and, using my measuring tools, how much of the deep and REM sleep I'm getting based on that. So that's a place, where you people can pay attention to that. And it's also important to know that that same gene also catalyzes over 100 things, meaning it changes. Once again, this is chemistry, so it's going to change these things into uh, convert them into things that can be processed out of the body. So if it's working a lot on caffeine, is it going to be working as well on other detoxing other things, right? Because I'm not saying coffee's toxic, but we just want to be careful about how many things we're asking this gene to do if it's suboptimal for you. So just bearing all of that in mind.
Well, I appreciate that information, and I think that it is time to shift over to some questions because we do have a lot of questions, and we can start weaving in some of the information that we've presented, and maybe even give a little bit more as we go. So, and the interesting thing is that our first question from Susan has to deal with sleep, REM and deep sleep. She's asking how many hours of REM and deep sleep do we recommend? And actually, this information is based on research, not just from us, but research from sleep studies. Dr. Matthew Walker is actually a pioneer in the field of sleep. He wrote the book Why We Sleep. It's fantastic. But when you're talking about REM and deep sleep, so REM optimally, if you are getting like 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, you want about 20 to 25% of that total sleep to be REM sleep. So that's going to be anywhere from like 90 minutes to 2 hours. Okay. Because remember, I said about the consolidation of memory, shifting short term to long term, learning, mood regulation, all that's happening during REM sleep. For deep, okay, you want deep sleep to be about 15 to 20% of your total sleep. So you're looking at around an hour and a half to 2 hours per night. Again, based on how many hours that you actually sleep, because it is during this time that supports that physical repair that I was talking about, helps with the immune system detoxification, hormone regulation. So very, very important. And again, we do have webinars that we've spoken more in depth about that if you want to dive deeper into it. All right. So Margaret has the next question, and she's asking, what are some ways for people to detoxify when they aren't the best at it genetically? Dr. Steady, want to field that question?
Sure. So, one of the things that we were talking about with methylation is that some people need supplementation in this area. And so, you might be someone who would benefit from, I don't know your genes, one or the other type of folate and one or the other type of vitamin B12. Um, Also, we would be looking at the antioxidants for SOD2 would be important depending on your GPX speed. And then there's the whole GST family, which you can also find in a lot of the same reports as you'll find the MTHFR and the SOD2, and based on that, you'll know whether or not taking something like glutathione would be a good idea, or whether you're better off taking more of the precursors to it. Because what you don't want to do, sometimes we take these things that we think are going to quote unquote detox us. And if we don't have the right genetics for it, it can actually make us feel a lot worse. And you might end up seeing somebody as a practitioner who says, oh, that's just a detox reaction. And maybe it is, or maybe it's that you're creating other issues in your body, and that's why you're not feeling well. So I think that's where the genetics really come in handy, and are actually vital for determining what is the best way for you to detox. And always drink water. I know it sounds so simple, but I'm a water person. I just always tell people drink lots of water.
Yeah, and honestly, that is so important because we really need to be able to flush our system. You can't flush it without water. So, but don't forget, you need your electrolytes, you need your trace minerals. Those are really important. And what you were talking about, and this question, her question was a great reminder or starting point with the understanding of the framework that we're talking about tonight. And that is to identify your genes, identify what it is, the blueprint you have to work with. The second thing is to adjust your lifestyle, your diet, your exercise regimen, the things that you do in your life to emphasize, to lean into the strengths and adjust for the weaknesses of that genetic blueprint. And finally, test to make sure that what you're doing is actually working. that you're actually moving that needle in the direction that you want. You've got to know where you're starting. You have to have, that baseline. Then you do something and you want to see, where's that baseline going? Are you moving up to, where you want to go, or it's going down a little bit? Maybe I shouldn't do that. Because there are some things that people think, oh, well, this is healthy. This particular food, this is a superfood. But for you, it may not be. It may be creating more inflammation. It may be causing more gastrointestinal upset. It may be disrupting your sleep. So if you're seeing that, going down from the baseline, well, then go back, identify again, readjust, and test again. So very, very important. And this is really where we at the DNA company are very unique. We don't just give you genetic results. We provide you that context. We provide you coaching. And by you implementing that, you can see the change. And that's really what we're looking for. And that's what all of you had said. Well, not all of you, but the majority of you had said in the poll, that you want to prevent that disease, that you basically want to have a better health span. So this is what you can do, because we are showing you how to move beyond insight into actionable coaching, into giving you something, okay, you have this, do this, this can be your outcome. So giving you those like tangible things to actually do. And that's really important, that it's, again, it is not just these pure genetic reports that just tell you, oh, you've got this possibility, propensity for a disease. And, okay, you're a fast caffeine metabolizer or a slow caffeine metabolizer. Okay, so what about it? Okay. We actually give you things going, okay, well, this is what you do about it. What's your goal? This is what you have. This is what you do. This is how you get to your goal. So moving on to another question. The next question is asking, can you speak to which genes impact heart health? Both her parents, Mary's asking, both her parents are in their 80s and they have congestive heart failure. Dr. Steady, can you give some information, some genes that impact cardiovascular health?
Well, in addition to ACE, which you already mentioned, I would definitely check out ApoA, 2, ApoE to see what your status is there, and 9p21. Those would be the ones that I would look at first. There are many more subtle genes that can be at play and impact things, but those are very directly related to things like cholesterol and heart disease and stroke and hypertension, things like that. So those would be the ones. Are you typing those in the chat for them?
No, I'm not. I was
Okay, I'll do that.
actually grabbing.
I'll just do that because I just realized that I spoke a little quickly, as I
That's okay.
sometimes do when I get excited about genetics, which is all
Yeah.
the time.
I was
So,
actually going to ask them to put it in.
okay, I will do that right now.
So, but also be aware that you can find these genes in the cardiovascular report.
That's right.
It's listing all of them. And then in the sub reports, it actually will give the genes that are more focused or that influence certain things like blood pressure, like, the hypertension, and other aspects of cardiovascular health will be in those sub reports. So, this is where if you do have your DNA 360, please go in, take a look, and then there's actually information. You can always go on your on the app, The DNA Way. If you don't have the app, download it. If you don't have your DNA 360 yet, get it. But if you don't have it yet, there's actually a sample report in the app that you can look at and see, oh, this is what it looks like. This is what it's going to show. And you can actually, take a look and see the genes that are in the cardiovascular report. And that can, speak directly to what you're asking about, the genes that can impact heart health. So I highly, highly recommend downloading our app, perusing it, and learning more.
I think you'll be able to speak to this next comment and question from Heidi, Dr. Varden, because I know that you're a fan of this
I am.
this supplement.
Yes. So here, let me clear this previous question. So Heidi is asking if we've ever heard of fatty 15. She's saying that it's more stable than the pill form or omegas. She said she sees great results with her sleep. And has also adopted sleep hygiene. And she mentioned something that I had said, that a good night's sleep starts with your morning light. Absolutely. And yes, you're very welcome for that information. And she said she's told many of her menopause women about that. So apparently Heidi is a health coach. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for being here. So fatty 15, for people who don't know what it is, I will say I personally take it. I have no affiliation. I just like the product. I like the research. But it is a dietary supplement that has the active ingredient of a carbon 15. So, when we're talking about fatty acids, they're based on how many carbons, and this gets to your chemistry, okay? How many carbons are attached. So it has 15 carbons, which is okay, I'll get this, pentadecanoic acid. That's the name of it. And it's a saturated fatty acid, and they're actually really interesting because they had done a lot of research with dolphins. That's how they found out about it. And the US Navy actually funds the research. So anyway, a lot of really good claims about it, as far as strengthening cellular membranes. It improves they state that it improves mitochondrial function, that it helps with the modulation of signaling pathways. So it just means that it helps to do that push-pull type of thing in pathways that are dealing with metabolism, immunity, inflammation. Therefore, it influences like glucose metabolism, liver health, immune balance, things like that. And it also helps to inhibit or slow down, stop inflammatory cytokines, and supporting the immune system. A lot of different scientific work that they have done. So yes, have heard of it, do take it, do like it. And glad you had brought that up and are using information for your clients. Thank you. So our next question is from Sheila, and she says, please do talk about how COMT matters in the methylation pathway. And actually, you've already touched on that. Is there anything that you wanted to bring up that you may not have covered that you think important?
Well, I think the one thing that I didn't mention that feels important is that some people uh, who want to take methylated vitamins because they think they should, based on their genetics, if they forget to look at COMT, what COMT does is it takes that methyl group and it adds it to things. But if it's slower at doing that, you could end up with a pileup. So it's sort of like, I don't, maybe I'm dating myself, that I Love Lucy episode with the conveyor belt. Like if you
Oh
have
my
a
gosh,
slow
yes.
COMT, you could end up like Lucy in that scene where there's more methylated stuff coming at the COMT than it can handle. And so sometimes when people who have a slow COMT take methylated vitamins, even if they're warranted because of their status with MTHFR and MTR and MTRR, it's still not a great thing to do every day, because otherwise the COMT gets overwhelmed and people can end up feeling a little bit agitated by that is one of the symptoms, or jittery, almost like they've had too much coffee. But they haven't necessarily. It's just that sometimes they're over methylated. And so that's when we have other webinars where we talk about how all of these things work together, and that you don't want to overdo something if you can't handle it. And I think that there's a follow-up question, which is about AG, which is a medium fast COMT. And that's probably great. It depends on what your other genetics are, how it will look for you. for some people, having a super fast one impacts things in a positive or negative way, and for some people, having a slower one matches more of the other things that they have going on and balances things out. And so, it's that's what makes it so much fun, is that it's all very, very individual.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not that there's necessarily or good or bad to it. There are beneficial and detrimental things for each of these particular versions. It really is based on context. So, there, you have to work that in as well. So, all right. So our next question is from Susan, and she's talking if SOD is average, which means the SOD 2, because by the way, there are more than one SOD genes and enzymes. But if SOD 2 is average, okay, a moderate speed of a CT, and your GPX is fast, so that would be a CC. What actions would you recommend? So you talked about that. Can you please quickly reiterate what you had mentioned about things that they could do to
It
help?
means you can pretty much go for it with the antioxidants because your GPX is gonna be able to keep up with them. So if you have a SOD2 that's average, it's a little bit slower. It's not super slow, but it's a little bit slower, and so you're going to want to increase your intake of antioxidants, and the good news is your GPX can handle it without, having too much hydrogen peroxide wind up in your cells. So eat those berries, take that CoQ10, do all the things.
Thank you. All right. Next question is from Patricia, and she's asking to please identify the CRY1 and clock genes. And I'm going to assume that you're talking about what the alleles are, what the single nucleotide polymorphisms, the variants are. So that's the answer I'm going to give. So for the CRY1, so this would be if you have a CC as in cat, okay, this would be a delayed circadian tendency. This is where you you're more likely to experience that delayed sleep phase, more of that night owl profile that I was talking about earlier. Falling asleep early, waking up early may be difficult without any particular lifestyle alignments. If you have a TT version, this is more of the wild type, the neutral. You're more likely to maintain a more traditional circadian rhythm with less genetic tendencies toward the delayed sleep-wake cycles that I spoke into more earlier. When we're talking about the clock gene, so the clock gene, the T version, so the TT would be more of that normal, regular, that traditional circadian rhythm, sleep-wake cycle, okay? Where if you have a C allele, CC being on that opposite end, that's where you have more of that dysregulation, that the timing, that sleep-wake cycle timing is off shift. So, and then again, if you have the combinations, if you have the CC version of both, that can, really off shift even more. So I hope that cleared that question. Okay, our next question is from April, and she's saying, do night owls get less REM and deep sleep? I heard 10 p.m. to midnight is most important, and wondering if that's true for people with night owl genes. And, that is such a fabulous question. And this is where we really need to work into living and sleeping for our genes. So when again, as far as like the sleep architecture that, I talked about earlier with the timing, with how much REM, how much deep sleep, and the way that sleep chunks are structured throughout the night, that you generally get more deep sleep earlier in your sleep time, and then it starts shifting to where you have more REM and less deep sleep as the night and going into the morning. Okay. And it's generally chunked in four different chunks. Um, but people with night owl tendencies, um, again, this is where the clock, the cry one are probably dysregulated. Uh, their shift, as I said just previously, that internal clock is a little bit later. That means that melatonin release, the body temperature dip, the sleep drive cues are all pushed at a later bedtime. Okay. And the thing is that it's important to note night owls do not inherently get less REM or deep sleep overall. The portion, okay, across the night is genetically and biologically regulated. It's not determined about when you fall asleep as far as the actual time. So timing matters. If a night owl has to wake up early for social or work reasons, okay, then you're going against your genetics. All right. And anytime you're doing that, you're getting into resistance, into the pressure. Okay. So if they go to sleep at 1 to 2 a.m., but wake up at 6 or 7, they're cutting short their time, that later part of the night when that REM is most dominant that I was talking about. So that can lead to REM deprivation. So, again, that is a little bit of a common myth when we're talking about that golden window that you're saying, oh, between the 10 and 12. Yes, it is true that deep sleep is front loaded, like I was talking about. But again, if you are working and living in congruency with your genes, then you're not going to be having those problems. And I know that was a little bit longer, but this is so nuanced. There's, so many aspects at play, and it's important for us to be clear about how that works and how to interpret our particular sleep type, our genetics, so that way we are optimizing a foundational aspect of our lives, which is sleep. Next question. Anhila, I think I pronounced that right. I'm not sure. I apologize if I didn't. So they're asking, what if my regular consistent time to go to bed is 2 a.m.? It used to be midnight, then 1. I've been trying for years to change it earlier, but there's always one more thing to do. I do everything else and I've tried everything else, including sleep hygiene and morning light exposure. Um, Honestly, I would say for something like this, because there are so many other factors that can be involved for a very specific person, such as yourself, with this situation, it is truly best to know, to identify the actual genes, to have someone help you to interpret that, like a clinician here at the DNA company, to be able to ask the right questions, to see your full history, because there's more going on here. And we really need to know that background in detail to be able, to help you. So definitely, I know we've dropped it in the chat. Maybe Vanny can drop it in again. Information if you want to look at any of our programs, so that way you can speak with one of our, work with one of our clinicians to see about helping you with your sleep. Okay, next question, Susan. She says her cry one is a GG. Can you please explain how that affects sleep? Okay, so for that, remember I had said C, C, and T's. Now, if you have a GG, sometimes what ends up happening is when DNA is read, DNA has a 5' to 3', the way that it is, because DNA is a double helix. Okay, it's got two, basically like two lines, and what's connected are the nucleotides. Well, the nucleotides that are together, A attaches to T, C attaches to G. So and I know this is getting technical, but this is it's important to understand why the letters are different, okay? Because when the DNA splits, when it's read through the machines, and the analyzer, depending on which strand is being read, it could either be a C or it could be a G, whether, if it's the 5' or if it's the 3'. Okay. So, which is called the sense or the antisense. So when I was talking about CC, that delayed circadian tendency, it is equivalent to the G in that respect. Okay. So your cry one being GG, that would be what I was talking about earlier as a CC having the delayed circadian tendency. So I know that can be a little confusing, and I hope that was a little bit, um, you know, better understood. So all right. And our last question of the evening is from April. And she is asking, do the endurance or power people have increased or decreased risk of high blood pressure or no connection? Okay. So when we're talking about the ACE genes, um, when you have the I the A allele, so that's the insertion, okay? This what it does is it allows for hang on, let me make sure that I have this correct. Okay. Um, so the insertions, the A allele version linked to better endurance, they have better uh, vasodilation. You know what? I want to make sure that this is okay. Okay, I just want to make sure that we have this correct. So endurance training, aerobic capacity, AA carriers tend to show greater improvements in the oxygen utilization. So yes, this can work into blood pressure. Generally, those that have the A alleles have better blood pressure. Of course, that's just one gene. I hate to reductionize it to just one gene, but it it responds better to the fluids, to reading the salts in the fluids, the particulates that are in the blood serum, okay, to be able to vasoconstrict, where G alleles are not as good at that and can actually keep constriction. But there's an interplay with the NOS3, nitric oxide production, which does a vasodilation. So saying it's just the ACE gene, that's like looking at the Mona Lisa through a straw. It gives you a little bit of information about something very important, but it's not letting you see the full picture. And so that's why I'm a little hesitant to say, risk for high blood pressure, not necessarily. I've had clients with dysregulation in their ACE gene, but their blood pressure is fine. And this really, what is involved are other aspects of their genetic profile, but also their epigenetics, how those genes are being expressed, their choices in diet, whether they exercise, whether they're getting sleep, whether they are doing the things to manage stress. Again, you could have a profile that looks like, death on wheels, like, how are you not, just having so many problems, but yet they can be the picture of health. And that is because they are doing the things. This is the nurture. They are doing the things to make sure that their genes are being expressed in an optimal way for the best health that they can have. So, that being said, Dr. Steady, do you have any last comments? Anything that you would like to add?
I think one of the things that I thought about when you were talking about the night owl thing is that, it's almost like being on a different time zone. So as long as you're getting the right amount of sleep, it doesn't matter as much when it happens. You wouldn't expect someone on the West Coast to go to bed at 10 p.m. East Coast time, right? So it's a little bit like that. That seemed like a very um, an analogy that would make sense to people. But basically, the only other thing that I'd like to say is that there is you should feel empowered by your genetics. That's the goal here at the DNA Company, is to empower you to take charge of your health and live a better, healthier, happier life. So, with that, I will say goodnight.
And I want to thank every one of you. Thank you, Dr. Steady, for being such a wonderful co-host. I love working with you. The information and the experience you have is just absolutely invaluable. And I appreciate that. And I'm sure our audience appreciates that. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here to learn. We hope you are walking away with some pearls of wisdom, some action items that you can actually utilize to help make your genetics work the way that you want. So until the next one, have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.